Koffee with Kathryn. I'm Kathryn Young, your host, and my good friend Dee has joined us again.
Hello.
Today we're going to be talking about personal boundaries, and it means a little bit something different to different people, so I wanted to show you what the Google definition is. And it says, personal boundaries are guidelines, rules, or limits that a person creates to identify reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for other people to behave towards them, and how they will respond when someone passes those limits. And I think this is a really great topic for people because we all have different ideas of what is and isn't appropriate to do around and with other people. And something that has come up in recent times is not making children hug even family members, not making them allow people into their personal space without permission. And I think that's important because there are a lot of children who are very sensitive to touch, and when they are sensitive to either touch or proximity to someone, sometimes it's a first sign that there is a problem with that adult. Kids are a little more intuitive than we give them credit for, so not making them hug somebody is actually a really good thing to do in terms of teaching them about personal boundaries and permission and consent. And it's also a red flag to investigate in terms of the possibility of some possible shady stuff going on. So what did you think of the definition?
I love the definition. Sometimes I have a hard time with the terms that you come up with and the subjects you come up with, developing in words what it means. Like, I know what it means abstractly, and I know how to apply it, but because I think in pictures and I have a really hard time turning those pictures into words, that's one of my learning, I don't want to call it disabilities, but limitations.
Sure.
One of my limitations is being able to take the pictures that I see and turn them into words. So I always love when you come in with an actual word definition that says, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. And I didn't know how to say that. So it was kind of awesome. I love that. I actually love that definition. Personal boundaries are teaching others how to treat you, basically.
Right. Exactly.
I like that. I think that's a perfect definition of that.
One of the examples I often use is the fact that I'm Italian, and Italians are known for hugging.
Right.
And I love hugging. I've been told I give really great hugs because they're really full embraces. They're not just the shoulder pat thing and air kisses.
A-line church lady.
I don't do that.
Yeah.
But
full body hugs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if I attend a church, for instance, that embraces people who are visiting and each other during the passing of the peace or just saying hello, I'm very uncomfortable. Because if I don't know you,
right,
I do not want you in my personal space.
Right.
And part of the reason for that for me is my post-traumatic stress disorder and my history of abuse.
Right.
So I'm extremely careful about who I allow in my personal space. So I don't like people to be behind me. I don't like people to be in my periphery vision. I really like to have a sound understanding of where you are in the room, and I don't want your hands on me. I just don't. When I was younger and I was attending a camp, someone actually, we were all kids, patted me on the behind, and I literally turned around and hit him. It's not advisable to hit anyone, ever. However, that was my self-defense mechanism. And a lot of people with post-traumatic stress disorder do that. It's an automatic response to someone being in your space without permission. Again, not advisable, but it happens. So I think it's important to teach people not just the physical boundaries of life with you, but verbal. There are certain words that, for instance, my children know not to use around me. Some of them are curse words, some of them are just words that are acceptable in other cultures with one another, but I don't accept, and there are just certain things that you don't say around me,
Right.
because I'll take issue with it for you. So those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. Do you have any examples of a personal boundary for yourself?
I have lots of personal boundaries. But people being in my personal space, not necessarily one of them. It kind of depends on my mood.
Okay.
However, when I'm pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
which has been many, many, many years,
Sure.
but when I'm pregnant, oh, I can't stand for people to touch me. I can't stand for, that whole, oh, how far along are you? And you put your hands on my
Belly, yes.
No, you cannot touch me. And I have to be really careful how I say that, because everybody has a personal boundary about being snapped on and yelled at and cursed at when they have no idea that something they're doing is wrong.
Sure.
Which is another personal boundary that,
Sure.
if you don't know that I have a problem with that and you do it because 90% of the population doesn't have a problem with it, and then I snap on you, it feels like it's for no reason. So that's another kind of thing that, you have to kind of be mindful of. You have every right to be protective of yourself and what people say and do and how they react to you. But you also have to kind of give that back the other way, which is kind of difficult sometimes for me.
And I will say that I differ in opinion in this way. If we are teaching children from an early age to set good, healthy boundaries for themselves, part of that learning process for them is ask for permission, gain consent. So I do agree with you that we have to be careful how we react, because it's, sometimes not the other person's fault, but we have to take personal responsibility for our actions and our words. So we should be asking for consent when we're touching someone, when we're in their personal space. I had a Spanish teacher who I love. I don't remember her name, I'm so sorry. She was my favorite Spanish teacher. She was from Chile, and she would stand directly next to me where my hand is now, have her hand around my chair, holding it, and be right next to my ear to explain whatever it is she needed to explain, to answer whatever question it is I had. It made me highly, highly uncomfortable. But that was something she told me, because we had this discussion. I was in middle school at that point, so I was able to talk to her. It was just part of our culture.
Right.
That was something that she learned growing up, and that was familiar to her, and she didn't think anything of it. As soon as I brought it to her attention, she stopped. And that's the beauty of communication. We have to get better at communicating. So we have to get better at teaching our children and ourselves about boundaries and respect and consent, and we have to make sure that we check ourselves with our reactions. Because like I said, when I was a child, turning around and punching the poor little boy was really not a good reaction. And I really needed not to do that, but I did. And then, of course, when someone who has post-traumatic stress disorder has that kind of extreme reaction, we have to give them a little bit of consideration, because clearly they've been through a lot, and that's a self-defense mechanism for themselves. So there's always a double-edged sword in this particular area, because personal boundaries are so personal.
Right. And the personal nature of it is what makes it not only important, but very touchy. Because a lot of the things that we do, we were raised to do them.
Yes.
They're cultural. They're familial. How do you say that? Familial.
Familial.
Thank you.
Tradition.
They're tradition. These are things that we've done all our life.
Right.
And then when we go out into the big, broad world of people who have been raised differently from us, and then we try to do the things that we've been taught to do, and they are reacting the way they've been taught to react. So it's always this kind of give and take and push and pull, and so being mindful of that. I think that is the most important thing, is to always be mindful of how you are affecting another person.
Absolutely.
And that's the most important thing.
But here's a prime example of the double-edged sword. So I have a grandchild, right? And I do not require them to, a family member, an older family member than even myself, comes over, and I do not make them hug that person hello.
Okay.
Listen, I don't make them hug Auntie Anne. Auntie Anne gets very upset. Her feelings are hurt because she doesn't get a hug, because my grandchild doesn't want to hug them today. So now we've got two sets of people whose feelings have to be taken into consideration.
Right.
The child who does not want to hug, and the older relative who feels hurt because she was raised as a matter of respect, you embrace and greet your family members when they come in the door, especially when they're coming to a holiday event.
Okay.
So you got two different sides of the same coin.
Right. I think I've always taught my children to always speak,
Sure.
especially when there's an adult that walks in the room. You must
Sure.
speak. You don't have to hug them. You don't have to
Right.
put up with anything, you know. And I always see these movies and read books where the grandmother comes up and pinches the cheeks and the kid hates it. And the kids hate it and the parents are like, I know, just put up with it.
Uh-huh.
And I'm thinking, no!
Right.
You are teaching them that bad touches are not bad.
Exactly.
That's what you're teaching them.
That's
So I've
right.
always kind of felt that way.
Right.
So I get it, but in some instances, you're just going to have hurt feelings.
I agree with you. But in some families, that's the kiss of death.
Right.
So
And I get
somehow
that.
you've got to, as the parents or the grandparents, reconcile that for yourself. Because
Right.
you have to teach children, especially in this day and time, to have strong self-esteem and absolute.
And it's okay not to want that kind of invasion into your personal space. It's okay.
And that's a part of self-esteem, is
Right.
being able to set those boundaries and be okay with Auntie Ann being a little bit hurt. You know, saying, I'm so sorry, Auntie Ann, I love you, I just don't want to be touched right now.
Right.
You know, and being able to have that hard conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would probably say, oh, that's okay. I'll hug you for them. That's
Oh, well, that's great.
Because that's what I do.
That's great.
And so you get extra hugs from me.
Yeah.
It's not the same, and I know it doesn't appease,
No.
but it.
No, but also in some families that wouldn't be allowed. So for instance, when I was growing up, Aunt Yolanda would always squeeze my cheeks, and if I pulled away from her, I would have probably been in trouble. And I know I would have gotten in trouble. Now my family didn't beat you, so I would have gotten screamed at, sent to my room. There would have been actual clear punishments for not letting her squeeze my
Right.
cheeks. So
Because I kind of understand it, because it's kind of like a rejection.
of course.
And nobody wants rejection, and
Right.
nobody likes rejection, and no parent wants to be embarrassed by their kid rejecting someone.
But if we just remember that it's not actually a rejection of the other person, it's
Right.
a rejection of the unwanted touch.
Right.
And we really have to teach children that it's okay to say no
Right.
appropriately. Not in a nasty way,
Right.
not in an aggressive way.
And not disrespectfully.
Right.
You know.
But that no is okay as an answer to anything that is happening, unless it's bedtime.
And I
then you have
think
to go to
it's
bed.
getting a little bit better.
I think it is.
I think
but-
it's getting a little bit better.
But you know, I have actually seen some parenting techniques go to the other extreme as well, where the parent is actually being run by the children. So you do have to be very careful not to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
So it's always
Woo.
a delicate balancing
Yeah, I
act when you're
can't.
teaching children, you know, good self-esteem, good
Right.
boundaries, because it can run amok very quickly.
Right.
So personal boundaries, going back to adults though, you know, being respectful of that is really, really important. But also not allowing it to get too extreme. So if you're in a crowded room and somebody bumps into you, screaming and being violent is really not a good reaction. And if you
Right.
find yourself in that situation, honestly, you need to seek therapy, because that's something that you will have to reconcile with yourself about how to manage those types of situations.
Right.
So, what did you learn today?
I learned, I think the biggest thing that I would take away from this conversation is the definition of personal boundaries, teaching others how to treat you. I like that. I think that is, I think that's actually a little profound
Mm-hmm.
when you really think about it.
And that's not my quote, by the way.
I
People
know
use
that, I know
quote.
that, I know. But I still like that the connotation that brings to mind. I prefer that to anything I would have come up with.
You know, the other thing I wanted to add to the conversation is when somebody is adamantly angry with you for holding a clear and sane boundary, or pushing against it to the point where they're being disrespectful to you, that's their problem. That means that they have a excuse me, have a lack of respect for you in general. And that is not a relationship that I would suggest cultivating.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point to make. Anyone who has a disrespectful problem with your own personal self is not someone you want to be around you.
Right.
I had a friend who I thought she was a very good friend. She had this issue. Now, this is my personal hang up. I don't call people. I don't call people because folks are busy, and every time I go to pick up the phone, I'm like, oh, they might be in the middle of this, or they might be in the middle of that. And it's my own personal hang up, but I'm almost 49 years old now, and it's probably not going to change at this point. So it's just something that I've accepted, and I tell everybody up ahead of time, look, if you're going to be friends, you're going to have to understand that I'm probably not going to reach out to you a whole lot because I get busy. And by the time I realize, oh man, I should have called so-and-so, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm not calling you at 3 o'clock in the morning. So if you are one of those people who judges how much someone likes you based on how much they reach out to you, I am going to fail that test every time. I'm just going to.
Yeah.
And I had a very good friend who, every time I walked through the door from work, my phone was ringing. Like, as soon as I'm walking through, like, she had it timed from, because I talked to her before I left work. We had what we called, me and another girlfriend of ours, the three of us had our 5 o'clock check-in. We would all call each other on three-way, talk to each other, and then I'm like, okay, I've been here long enough, I'm going to go leave now and head home. You know, and it used to take me about an hour to get home, and as I walked through the door, the phone would start ringing. Every day.
Right.
Every single day for months this happened. So then, eventually, she complained to our other friend that she always has to call me, that I never call her. And I thought, I never get a chance to call you. The phone is ringing before, I don't even get a chance to walk in the door, take my coat off, put my bag down, get something to eat. The phone is ringing literally as I'm walking through the door. When do I have a chance to call you?
And who initiated the three-way call?
It was usually me because I was at work, and
Well,
it was
then
easy
you
to
called
do.
her. I know.
Sometimes-
Perception.
Sometimes not. But
Yeah.
it was, our daily calls. Sometimes it was me, sometimes it was any of us, Sometimes the two girls would be already talking, and then they'd say, oh, it's 5 o'clock, let's, add D in. And then other times I'd look at the clock and say, oh, it's 5 o'clock, I haven't heard from the girls. And I would call them,
Right.
and they were already talking. They're like, oh, we didn't realize it's 5 o'clock, we'll call you right back. That kind of thing.
Sure.
But still, you cannot, if you have a personal boundary or something that you need that you're not getting, you have to kind of look at it and say, our relationship started like this, and this is the way it has progressed. And so for me to expect them to do something different when I've taught them that this is the way it's going to be is a little crazy.
Well, yes.
I hate to use that word, but...
People do grow and change, though. So.
And absolutely, but if this is the nature of how how things have gone,
you can't.
Expect it to change without a conversation,
right?
Is kind of unfair.
It is unfair.
I think that is something that is kind of a piece of this. It's kind of a tangent, but it goes along with it.
And while I'm a firm believer in people do grow and develop as people, I also believe that, I lost my train of thought. People do change, but they have to change for themselves.
Right.
And you can't make someone change their boundaries.
Right, absolutely.
You can't, unless they're an unhealthy boundary.
Right.
If they have an unhealthy boundary, then it's something that you should discuss and figure out how to deal with.
Right.
But I actually had a client who was perpetually late for our appointment. And this one particular day, I'm not a very fluid person. I'm a very boundaries-oriented person. I'm arguably an expert on boundaries because I have a lot of them. And being on time for me is one of them. I'm not a very fluid person. I can go with the flow on certain occasions, but if we're supposed to do something at a certain time, I expect us to start on time and leave on time, and with a little bit of exception, but not very much. And this one particular time, this client was late and then expected me to stay late, and when I said that I was not capable of doing that, this client literally blew up. Like, literally lost their temper, was yelling at me, saying very inappropriate things, saying that me and my boundaries, and that was the day that I learned that this person really didn't have any respect for me as a professional, because they weren't able to, A, meet the standard,
Right.
and B, live up to the consequences of their choice. They choose to start late, but I'm choosing to end on time. They're losing some time, and that was offensive to them.
Right, but that's their fault.
Yes.
Not yours.
Yes.
They lost their time based on their behaviors.
Exactly.
And I am a firm believer in that people need to learn from their own mistakes as much as they need to learn from the, experience of others. If you keep extending that time, they never learn not to do that.
Exactly.
So that's the other thing about personal boundaries. Sticking to your own boundaries and you can't, if you had extended that time and kept doing it and remained angry, then that would have been your issue.
Absolutely.
But once you stuck your foot down and said, no, we're not going past the time because you were late, you did this, and making them accountable for their actions is very important.
And you bring up a really good point.
Because that's where the teaching how to treat me comes from.
You bring up a really good point in terms of the anger. I'm not angry when you blow off most of my boundaries. I'm not angry. I'm just not going to deal with it. The consequence of blowing my boundary is I remove myself from the situation, because I'm very clear that my boundaries are safe, sane, and appropriate for me.
Right.
They are not overstepping or overreaching. They do not encroach on somebody else's right to be who they are. They are for me, for my comfort and safety and sanity. If I were, like you said, to continue to allow someone to step over that time boundary in this particular case, not only am I encroaching on someone else's professional time with me,
Right.
but I'm also doing exactly what you said, teaching them that that's okay, and I'm being disrespectful to myself.
Right.
And the more a person is disrespectful to themselves, the more you chip away at your own self-esteem and self-worth and belief in yourself.
And if you don't believe in you, how can anybody?
Agreed. So it's extremely important to be firm, kind, and as emotionless as possible, because what I firmly believe is, if you believe in what you're doing, you're not going to get angry at someone else doing something different. You're just going to say, okay, well, that's okay for you, but it's not okay for me, and we're moving on because this is my boundary, and I get to set that. And if you can't live with that, then this is a relationship I can no longer cultivate. And I've done that a lot of times, and 90% of the time people will step up and be part of the solution, and that'll be the end of it.
Right.
So do you want to say anything more?
I think I'm done.
Okay. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.